At some point, a lot of people in the second half of their career arrive at the same quiet realization. They're still doing the job, showing up on time, meeting the metrics, playing the part, but something has shifted. And they know somewhere in that place where you know things before you're ready to say them out loud, that it's time to start thinking about what comes next. What we don't know, what they don't know is how to do that without feeling like they're betraying the people they work for, or without blowing up a situation that's still paying their mortgage, or without walking into a legal or professional landmine they can't see coming. That's what we're talking about today, not how to update your LinkedIn or polish your resume. Those are tactics. These are about something harder, how to search for a job with your integrity intact while you're still fully employed. That's a harder thing than it sounds. Welcome to Living Without an Expiration Date. I'm your host, Rich Jones. The show is for people in the second half of their careers, navigating the part that nobody wrote the manual for. Today's episode sits at an intersection that I think is underexplored and, frankly, undertreated in most career advice spaces. Because most career content assumes you're either fully employed and content or fully unemployed and searching. It doesn't spend much time in the middle, in that specific, uncomfortable stretch where you are employed, need to stay employed, want to handle this well, but know you need to move. I want to be honest with you about what this episode is and what it isn't. This is not a tactical how to guide for networking your way into a new role. There are plenty of podcasts that do that, and they're useful. What I'm interested in today is the ethics and the psychology of a job search conducted from inside a job, the decisions you make about what you tell people, what you keep private, where you draw lines, how to manage the guilt and the cognitive dissonance that comes from sitting in a meeting about a project you know you may not be around to finish. We're going to move through this in a few distinct phases. I'll spend some time setting the context, why the situation is genuinely hard, and why the usual advice misses the mark. Then we'll go through what I'll call the 5 principles of an integrity-based employed job search. And I'll close with something that I think doesn't get enough what you owe yourself in all of this. If you're currently in the situation, I hope this episode feels less like an advice and more like a conversation you've been needing to have. Part 1, why is this actually hard? Why is the situation more complicated than anyone admits? Let me start by acknowledging something that most career coaches won't say out loud. Looking for a job when you're employed is an inherently ethical, complex act. Not unethical, not wrong, but genuinely complex in ways that deserve honest examination rather than breezy reassurances. Here's what I mean. When you conduct a job search while employed, you are in some sense dividing your attention from your commitment. You are, to varying degrees, using your employer's time, your employer's connections, and your employer's reputation to pursue an exit. You may not be sitting in strategic planning sessions You may be sitting in strategic planning sessions while privately wondering if you'll be there to execute the strategy. You may be managing people who trust you, mentoring people who depend on you, while quietly preparing to leave them. I'm not saying makes you any of this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because pretending it doesn't exist doesn't make it easier. It just makes you less equipped to navigate it thoroughly. The discomfort you feel about this is not a bug, it's information. It's telling you that you are a person with a functioning conscience, and that situation requires care. Now, here's the other side of the coin. Your employer is not obligated to keep you forever. They make strategic decisions based upon their interests. They restructure, they reorganize, they eliminate positions when it's convenient for them to do so. That is the nature of employment. And it means that looking out for your own future, including looking while you're still employed, is not a betrayal. It's a rational self preservation. It is what adults do. These two things are both true at the same time. The situation requires care, and it is also completely legitimate. Holding both of these things is where integrity actually lives, not in some tidy, uncomplicated rule, but in the ongoing tension between them. So, why do most people handle this badly? Why do searches conducted from inside a job tend to get messy, leak out in awkward ways, create rational relational damage, and generate regret? A few reasons. First, people underestimate the time it takes. They think they'll run a quick, quiet search, land something in 60 days, and transition cleanly. It rarely works that way. A search that drags on for 6 or 8 months starts to seep into everything. Attention wanders, performance dips. People notice things they can't quite name. Second, people tell too many people too soon. The impulse to share, especially with trusted colleagues, with people you feel like friends inside the organization, is understandable. But the workplace is not a sealed environment. Information moves. What you tell one person in confidence on Tuesday has a way of reaching someone else you didn't intend it to by Friday. Third, people conflate honesty with full disclosure. They think that being a person of integrity means they have to tell their employee what they're thinking. That's not what integrity requires. Integrity is about not lying, not deceiving, not manipulating. It does not require you to volunteer information that would put you at a professional disadvantage. Fourth, this one's quieter than it matter, but it is quieter, but it matters. People feel guilty, and they handle the guilt by becoming either reckless or passive. Reckless, they tell people they shouldn't. They disengage too visibly. They start mentally checking out. Or passive, they slow down the search, delay the hard conversations with themselves, postpone the discomfort until it becomes a crisis. None of these are none of those are integrity, they're avoidance. So with that as context, let's talk about what doing this very well looks like. 5 principles for doing this with integrity. I want to offer you 5 principles, not steps, because this isn't a sequence you execute in order. These are more like orientation points, ways of thinking about this that keep you on solid ground throughout. Principle number 1, get clear on your own reasons first. Before you update a single profile, before you reach out to a single contact, before you do anything externally visible, spend real time with your own reasons. Why are you looking? That sounds like a simple question, but I want you to resist the simple answer because the simple answer, I'm ready for something new, I've outgrown this role, I want better compensation, may be true, but it may not be the whole truth. And the parts you're not saying to yourself yet are the parts that tend to cause problems. Some questions worth sitting with. Is this about the job or about something else in your life that the job is absorbing? Sometimes people start a job search when they actually need to address a relationship, a health issue, a question about who they're becoming. The job is easier to be angry at. The job is easier to be angry at than the real thing. Are you running towards something or away from something? Both can be valid, but they lead to different search strategies and they come with different risks. Running away tends to produce hasty decisions. Running toward tends to produce more intentional ones. Next, what would it take for you to stay? This is not a question designed to talk you out of searching. It's a diagnostic question. If you can answer it clearly, if there is a specific set of things that would genuinely change your situation and make staying feel right, then you should know that before you leave. Not because you should necessarily try to get those things, but because you should know whether you're leaving something fixable or something that isn't. And what are you afraid of? About leaving, about staying, about the search itself? Name it. Because unnamed fear tends to run the operation without your permission. Getting clear on your own reasons does a few things for you. It grounds the search in something real. It helps you articulate your story to interviewers without sounding like you're running from something. It protects you from making a lateral move dressed up as progress, which is one of the most common and least discussed pitfalls of a search conducted while employed. When you have a job, you're less desperate. Less desperate often means more thoughtful, but it can also mean less rigorous because you can afford to say yes to things that feel like improvements but aren't real ones. Getting clear on your reasons is what protects you from that. Principle number 2, decide what you will and won't disclose and hold to it. This is a principle where people often either overshare out of guilt or underthink out of avoidance. Let's be direct about what you're actually obligated to disclose and what you're not. You are not obligated to tell your employer you're searching. Full stop. You may have a contractual obligation to disclose if you're considering roles with direct competitors. Many employment contracts include provisions around this. And if yours does, you need to read it carefully and understand what it requires. More on that in a moment. But absent a specific contractual obligation. Your job search is your private business. You're not obligated to tell your colleagues, even the ones you feel like friends. You know this is hard. If you've worked alongside someone for years, if they've trusted you, if there's genuine affection there, the impulse to tell them feels like the honest thing. But telling colleagues creates risk that isn't yours to carry. It puts them in an awkward position. It asks them to keep a secret that isn't theirs to keep. And it changes the dynamic in ways that often become visible. What you are obligated to, and there, and here's where integrity actually comes in, is this. You are obligated not to lie. If your employer directly asks you whether you're looking, you face a harder choice. You can decline the answer, which communicates a great deal on its own. You can be honest, which carries obvious risks, or you can deflect, which is different from lying, but only barely. And you should know the difference. Most people are never directly asked, but some are. And if you work for someone who manages closely, who has strong emotional investment in the team's stability, or who has heard something through the grapevine, it's worth thinking through in advance what you should say rather than improvising in a charged moment. There's another category of disclosure worth thinking about: references. Most employers ask for references. Most candidates, when they're employed, face the same dilemma. Do you list your current employer? The answer is, in almost every case, is no. You are not expected to provide your current employer as a reference. It's common practice and entirely understood to provide references from former employers, from professional contacts outside of your current organization, from clients, if applicable. What you do need is to have a clear conversation with the people you do list. Tell them you're searching. Tell them what you're looking for. Give them enough context to speak specifically to your strengths. Don't let a reference be surprised by a call. That's not fair to them, and it tends to produce weak references. One more thing on disclosure: your LinkedIn profile. If you set your profile to signal that you're open to opportunities, and LinkedIn has a specific setting for this that is supposed to be invisible to your current employer, understand that it is not perfectly invisible. HR professionals at your company may be able to see it, depending on how their accounts are configured. It won't necessarily blow up your situation, but don't operate under the assumption that it's completely sealed. More visible than the open to work signal is simply activity. If you suddenly start posting regularly, updating your profile, adding skills and endorsement after years of dormancy, people notice. You don't have to freeze all professional activity, but be conscious of what a sudden surge in LinkedIn activity signals and whether you're comfortable with it. Principle number 3, understand your contractual and legal obligations before you need to. This section is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. If you have a specific concern, consult one. What I want to do here is flag the categories of obligation that catch people off guard, because most people in the second half of their careers have never thought carefully about these things. Non-compete agreements. If you signed one, read it. Many people sign non-competes as part of onboarding paperwork and then often forget they exist. They vary enormously in scope and enforceability. Some are nearly unenforceable. Some are very much enforced, and it depends heavily on the state you work in and the specifics of what you signed. If you're in a senior role or in a specialized industry, this matters more. The time to read your non-compete is before you accept an offer that might implicate it, not after. Non-solicitation agreements, separate from non-competes, these typically restrict you from recruiting your current employer's employees or clients after you leave. They're worth understanding because violated non-solicitation clauses are a fairly common source of post-departure litigation, especially when a senior leader leaves and then builds a team from former colleagues. Confidentiality and intellectual property clauses. You cannot take your employer's proprietary information with you. This sounds obvious, but it's violated more often than people realize. Not usually through deliberate theft, but through careless habit. Sending files to a personal email to work on them at home. Using employer developed tools or frameworks in your new role. Relying on confidential client information you've internalized. The fact is, these violations are inherent, doesn't make them legally safe. Here's the practical implication of all this before you start your search in earnest. Pull out the employment agreement you signed, whatever form it takes, and read it. If there are provisions you don't understand, or if you're considering a role that might implicate a non-compete, talk to an employment attorney. Not because you're planning anything wrong, but because information asymmetry is a real risk, and you deserve to understand the playing field you're operating in. This isn't paranoia, it's preparation. And it's the kind of thing that people in the second half of their careers who have accumulated both experience and exposure need to take more seriously than they often do. Principle number 4, protect your performance. This is the one that people least want to hear, and the one that matters most. While you're searching, you're still being paid to do a job. And the way you do that job during a search that may last months matters. It matters ethically because the people you work with deserve your real effort. It matters practically because your reputation is being formed right now in real time by how you behave while you're on your way out the door. Here's what I see happen. Someone starts a job search. The search takes longer than expected. Months go by. They're spending mental and emotional energy on interviews, on revising their story, on the anxiety of not knowing. And slowly, without quite meaning to, they stop being fully present at work. They're going through the motions. They're producing work that's good enough, but not their best. They're letting things slide that they would have caught before. And then one of a few things happens. Either they get the new job and leave, but they spent the last 8 months burning down their professional reputation in ways that follow them, or the search stalls and they're still employed. And they're now trapped in an organization where they've been visibly disengaged for most of a year. Or worst version, they get managed out because declining performance, even slow, subtle declining performance, is visible. I want to offer you a different frame. The way you do your current job during a job search is one of the clearest tests of your professional character. not because your employer is watching in some moralistic sense, but because the habits you reinforce while you're looking will follow you into whatever you do next. People who check out while they're searching tend to carry that same pattern into their next role and when things get hard. People who maintain their standards, who keep doing good work, even when they're ambivalent about staying, those are the people who tend to make real transitions rather than just lateral moves. There's a practical dimension. The people you work with are now part of your professional network for the rest of your career. Your reputation with them is being built in real time. How you handle a difficult period, whether you stay present, whether you keep your commitments, whether you treat people with respect while privately planning your exit, is remembered, sometimes for a long time. None of this, none of this means you need to perform enthusiasm you don't feel. You don't, it doesn't mean you can't be honest with yourself about your ambivalence. It means doing the job you agreed to do to the standard you agreed to do it until the day you finally leave. It's not a small thing. For a lot of people in this situation, maintaining that standard is one of the harder acts of professional discipline they'll ever practice. Principle 5, be intentional about timing and transition. At some point, the search ends. You get an offer, you decide to accept it, and then you have to do the hardest part of this whole process, actually leaving. How you leave matters as much as how you searched. Most employment arrangements have a standard notice period. 2 weeks is common in the US, though senior roles often carry expectations of longer. Know what yours is. Know what's standard in your industry. Know what your employment agreement actually specifies and what your organization actually expects given your role. When you give notice, be direct and professional. You don't owe anyone a lengthy explanation of your reasons, though you should be prepared to offer a brief, honest account if asked. You don't need to be emotional about it in either direction, neither overly apologetic nor coldly clinical. You made a decision, you're communicating it, and that's the conversation. There's a version of giving notice that a lot of people in the second half of their career struggle with, the counter-offer conversation. When you give notice, there's a reasonable chance your employer will respond with a counteroffer, an increase in compensation, a change in title, a commitment to address whatever drove you to look in the first place. Here's what I want you to think about carefully before you get there. The research on counteroffer acceptance is fairly consistent. Most people who accept a counteroffer leave anyway within 12 to 18 months because the things that drove them to the search in the first place, the culture, the ceiling, the relationship with leadership, the sense of misalignment, don't change because the salary number changed. If you did the work I prescribed in Principle 1, if you got genuinely clear on your reasons, then you'll be in a better position to evaluate a counteroffer honestly. If the thing that drove you to search was genuinely addressable, and the counteroffer genuinely addressed it, genuinely addressed it, then it might be worth considering. But be honest with yourself about whether you're accepting because it's actually better or because it's easier and more comfortable than leaving. The transition period itself, from giving notice to your last day, is another test. Do the handoff work. Document what needs to be documented. Transfer knowledge genuinely. Don't use the transition period as an opportunity to stop producing or to quietly sabotage things by leaving them in worse shape than you found them. The person who comes behind you, the colleague who has to absorb your responsibilities, none of this is their fault. How do you leave will be remembered by people who stay, and you will likely cross paths with some of those people again. Here's the part nobody talks about. I want to spend a few minutes on something that tends to get lost in the practical conversation about job searching. Most of what I've talked about today has been about your obligations to your employer, to your colleagues, to your own integrity. But there's another side to this, and it matters just as much. What do you owe yourself? You owe yourself honesty about whether this is the right time to move, not just whether you want to move, but whether you're moving towards something real or away from something you haven't figured out how to face. You owe yourself permission to grieve, even if you decided to leave, even if the decision's clear and right. Leaving a place where you've spent years of your life involves loss of familiar relationships, loss of identity that was wrapped up in your role, loss of certainty about what comes next. That deserves acknowledgement. You don't have to perform excitement about the future while you're still navigating the exit. You owe yourself patience with the timeline. Job searches take longer than they should. The market is not efficient. Decisions are delayed. Opportunities fall apart. If you've been, if you're in the second half of your career, there may be additional friction that's worth being honest about. Not to become cynical or defeated, but to calibrate your expectations accurately so that you're not repeatedly blindsided. You owe yourself the right to be selective. One of the genuine advantages of searching while employed is that you can be selective. You don't have to take the first offer that arrives. You can hold out for something that's actually right. Use that advantage consciously rather than letting anxiety rush you into something that looks good enough. And finally, this one matters. You owe yourself a recognition of the courage this takes. Looking for a job while employed is not a comfortable or easy thing, especially in the second half of your career when the stakes feel higher and the margin for error feels smaller. When you're carrying more responsibility at home, more accumulated identity in your current role, more awareness of how things can go wrong. Doing this thoughtfully, with care for the people you're leaving, with honesty about your own reasons, with your performance intact, and with your integrity in place, that is not a small thing. It's actually a kind of professional maturity that takes years to develop. If you're in the middle of it, I hope you can hold on to it. Let me close with something, and I want to say it plainly. The framing that job searches while employed need to be sneaky or deceptive or conducted in the shadows. That framing is both wrong and unnecessary. You can do this with integrity. It doesn't require you lie. It doesn't require you harm the people you work with. It requires clarity about your own reasons, restraint about what you disclose and to whom, continued commitment to doing good work, and enough self-awareness to know the difference between an ethical tension and an actual ethical violation. The discomfort of this situation is real. I'm not going to minimize it, but discomfort and wrongdoing are not the same thing. Most people in the middle of an employed job search are, are not doing anything wrong. They're doing something genuinely difficult with imperfect information under real pressure. If that's you, you're navigating it the best you can. That's enough. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next episode. And if you know someone who is going through this transition or this disruption in their careers, please share this with them.